Cool. Hey, everybody. I'm John Cavelli, and welcome to the show. Trombone is Enough. Today, my special guest is Charlie Halloran. Say
Hey,
hi, Charlie.
hey guys, how you doing, man?
I'm really good, man. Thanks so much for agreeing to do this interview program.
Absolutely, happy to, of course.
I was trying to recall the very first time I met you. I was just playing some random gig, and you just kind of showed up with somebody else, and you guys just walked right up and started sitting in. And I and you had it was years before you left St. Louis, I think.
Sure, sure, okay.
In fact, yeah. So I was like, who is this guy? And he's great, you know.
Oh, that's a trip. Well, I always knew coming up from my older brothers are both musicians, and it was always you and John Wolf, and
Uh,
that was those were the you guys were the two guys I was kind of who were on my radar in St. Louis.
oh,
There's a lot of trombone players that I knew, of course, Rodney Lancaster and a couple others, but it was like you and John were the people that were the most kind of on my radar.
that totally surprises me. I had no idea I was on anybody's radar.
Yeah, definitely. For sure.
That's funny. And John Wolf, he was on my radar because he was with Soulard Blues Band, right?
Exactly.
Uh,
Right. And Beth Tuttle and stuff. Yeah, he's great. And I recently did a gig with Duke Robillard in California from Roomful of Blues. And I'm always go, hey, I know John Wolf. Oh yeah, John.
oh my God. Well, Duke Robillard, he's pretty well known, right?
Yeah, Fabulous Thunderbirds and Roomful of Blues are his kind of two
Yeah.
groups. I
How
I
did you how did you get to know him?
we both do this festival on the West Coast that's booked kind of like a jazz party style where they don't really hire a lot of bands. They hire three guys from here, four guys from there, one guy from here, one guy. And then when you get there, they kind of piece a bunch of different groups together.
Oh
So,
wow. That
yeah,
sounds really fun.
it's a fun setup. It's cool. This one was in Eureka, California, the Redwood Coast Music
Wow.
Festival. But
That
so I
sounds
was out there and I did playing with a group. Most of the guys were from Los Angeles. The bassist was from Minneapolis, but a guy named Mark Caparone who does like the kind of Louis Armstrong and the All Stars thing, and
okay.
Duke started doing like kind of more swing oriented music. And so this group kind of led by this Southern California group with me, with the bass player, with Duke,
Wow.
just calling tunes.
That
Nothing special, but fun.
that sounds like a lot of fun. Do you
Oh,
get to do a lot of those kinds of things, or do you spend a lot most of your time in New Orleans?
I'm mostly in New Orleans. I do enjoy doing those. It's just kind of a different scene. I know a lot of the people that do it, but I've just kind of not gotten that call very often. There's a handful of trombonists in New York City and in LA that kind of have that market cornered who are monsters. So they're well deserved, of course. But no, I do this one in Eureka. There's a similar one in Sun Valley, Idaho, that I've done a handful of times. There's one in San Diego I've done once. But for the most part, I'm in New Orleans. It's hard to get people out of here. So it's
Well, I think once you get down there and you get into your group of contacts, you probably don't have much reason to leave.
the summers are rough. So it's getting out of here in the summer is nice, but absolutely. I mean, September, October through June, there's a lot of work and the weather's fairly nice for most of that. And
Sure.
there's it's kind of its own little uh ecosystem down here, really.
How did you? I'd like to learn. I want to hear your whole story, but I definitely when maybe we'll just go back to the beginning and
Yeah. Yeah.
um but I want to hear all about New Orleans and whether it's easy to get into the groups or not. But, when you went down there, did you um have a reason to go, or did you just say I'm going there?
Right. I had been planning on going, or it was one of a handful of options I'd been kicking around in my head while I was at Webster. Um, I was at Webster University in 2005 when Katrina hit New Orleans, and so a lot of Tulane students and not LSU, but Loyola, UNO students wound up at Webster. So I was hanging out with these New Orleans kids my age who music students from here, from New Orleans. Also, Jeremy Davenport, the trumpet player, brought his band back to St. Louis, his band that he plays with nightly here. They got a nightly gig in Clayton in St. Louis. So
Right.
I was hanging out with these New Orleanian students and then going in the evening to see Jeremy. And then I got to know Jeremy's band fairly well. And so there was just a lot of people going, you should try New Orleans, check New Orleans out. It's got a cool scene. It's got a cool scene. So I moved here. I went to Rochester for a few years in 2006, 2007. But when I got down here, I didn't have a gig for, specifically, but I knew a lot of people. I kind of had been given this is how you do it. This is how you break in. I had met the trombone players in Bonorama, Craig Klein and Mark Mullins and Rick Trolson. I had met all of them in Soulard when they were playing in St. Louis. So I
Right.
didn't know a lot of people. They were touring a lot at the time. So that was four of the best trombone players in the city who were on the road all of the time, so that opened up a lot of work in New Orleans. I was fairly strategic about it, but I didn't have a gig to fall into.
Wow. Wow. Well, that takes a lot of nerve, and but you obviously made it work, because I remember going down. My wife took me down there for my birthday.
Yeah.
What year? I think that was maybe 2014 or 2015.
Was that that
And
long?
sure enough, you were in a club there.
Yeah.
Uh, and I get to say hello. And you looked like you were having a ball, but also, had plenty of work. Has it
Yeah.
has it always been like pretty fruitful?
I've been fortunate. Yeah. I've been able to make it performing my job. I don't teach particularly often. Occasionally, but it's mostly playing, and it's mostly playing in bars. It's
Uh-huh.
kind of just a
Is-
bar band musician. But the scene down here is interesting in that there's music. My dog's going nuts. There's music at everything. So there's music at birthday parties and music at bar mitzvahs and music for most holidays, and music for Halloween and music for it's everywhere
Yeah.
in a way that I hadn't seen in other cities I've lived in. So it was just there's just a lot of gigs here.
Yeah.
you know. So I
Yeah.
so I do play in a lot. It's also kind of the mystique is taken away a little bit. Like it's just if you can play, you can get a gig, you can go do a job every night. Just like you can go drive Uber, or you can go wait tables, or you can go wash dishes, you can go play trombone, you can go like that's not out of left field. That's kind of just a normal.
It's
Yeah,
just another way to make a living in New Orleans.
exactly.
Would you say that a lot of your gigs are for locals and local events, or
The ones I prefer are I definitely that club you saw me at was probably the Spotted Cat, which over
yeah.
the last 15 years that I've been here has become less of a locals bar and more of a tourist bar.
Yeah. How has that changed that bar? Because we went there because people said, well, you got to go to Frenchman and you got to go to Spotted Cat.
Yeah. So well, when I moved to town, 2008, I started hanging out in New Orleans in 2003, 2002, 2003. When in 2008, you didn't make a lot of money there, and it would have been all of your friends and some people that got lost. I found the place when I got lost visiting, and yeah, so it would have been a local spot almost exclusively then. You didn't
Wow.
make any money, but it was fun, and you knew everybody, you saw everybody. And then that whole strip was kind of hipper, quote unquote. I mean, you were getting free jazz, and you were getting original music, and you were getting, not necessarily tourist driven music or commercial music.
Right.
As 15 years have gone by, there's way more foot traffic now, mostly tourists now, although not exclusively. And there's still a lot of really good artistic music being played on that street. But you definitely see more just like Okay, that's not really a band, but there's 6 people that can do the gig and they show up on time and whatever. So they're a
Yeah,
band this week, you know. But everyone's making a lot more money now than they were 15 years ago. So,
right,
you know, it's
right.
louder, there's more people, you make more
Yeah,
money.
more money. The tourists came in. Are the artistic stuff is still happening, but it's just elsewhere now.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you know, and there was an article on Facebook, and everyone got mad a year or so ago about how there's no good music on Frenchmen Street, and as a reaction to that article, there's been a lot of musicians who are purposely putting really great music on Frenchmen Street since then. So it's kind of even gotten better within the last year. It's not just the Spotted Cat. DBA is right across the street, and is a great club that I play once or twice a week. Snug
Yeah,
Harbor is right across the street next door to DBA, and that's more of a straight ahead room. I'll play there a few times a year, but that's a great gig over there. They
mhm.
have programming in there. So, and then there's the whole other block that I almost never play on with 4 or 5 venues just 200 feet away. So
Yeah.
I
It's
don't
just
go to things very often, but it's a dense 2 blocks of probably like 10 clubs.
That's incredible. It's just blows me away that when people talk about the scene here, um, I'm, I think the first thought in my head is that the tourists don't come to St. Louis for music like they go to New Orleans for music.
Right.
And then I that makes me wonder, well, in New Orleans, do the locals come out and support the scene? And like how would you say that how is that going? Do you get a lot of locals coming out and supporting? Um,
So you're right. So there isn't, at your typical gig on Frenchman Street, there will definitely be, I'd say, you can count on, depending on the band, 20%, 25% of the room will be locals and fans of the band. And then the rest of the crowd is just people that happen to be there who don't know who you are. The
right.
hotel to go, or they read it in a guidebook or something.
Yeah.
There's a much larger community of
Your dog wants to be on the show. That's fine.
there's a much larger community of porch parties, of restaurants, of smaller clubs that are not on that main strip where it's all locals, 100%. And
Nice.
and I try to make that as much of my calendar as I can.
Yeah.
And there are people that are only doing that and never play on Frenchman Street. Like that's a
Yeah.
move some people have been able to figure out as well. I'm probably 50-50 where, playing local events.
So when your recent album came out, I really love that recent album.
Thank you.
Um, Sounds so cool.
Yeah.
One thought that came to my head was, how often do you get to play that versus just what you're hired to play by other people?
Yeah, exactly. So my last couple of albums have all been leaning on music from the Caribbean mostly.
Yeah.
And that band plays 3 times a month, 4 times a month. So if I'm playing, I kind of play 6 times a week. And so it's not a majority. It's
Right.
it's once a week if I'm lucky. It's every other week, kind of on
Yeah.
average.
It,
Um,
do you have issues when you do get a gig for that stuff? Um, do you have to hire the same people, the same personnel?
I
And then do
try
you have
to.
conflicts like with that?
Yeah, yeah, that comes up. I have a bench for sure. Howdy.
Okay.
I have a bench of guys, definitely. The bassist and guitarist both have a touring gig with a woman named Layla McCalla, and
Hmm.
she gets hooked up with nice tours. So they're gone quite a bit. So I've got another, 2 or 3 guys on each instrument. And then I can't play with the full group often. So a lot of times it will just be the drummer or just one of the percussionists. And again, I've got 3 or 4 different percussionists I use. I only really have the one drummer, and he's in a band called the Iguanas that tour a lot also. So I
Oh, that's a well-known group.
they're great. That's a wonderful group from here. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I do end up with, not those 5 guys often. but I try to book out, and I have, again, like I've got the second guy I call on guitar has done the gig just as much. So
Are the economics um supportive of using that, like that size of a group? Like, can you get work for a large group?
Yeah,
Or do
yeah. I mean,
you go down?
I bet we play as a quartet,
Okay.
and a lot of times when it's like corporate things, they'll say, we've got a great budget, but we only have the room, physical space for 3 people or 4 people, which drives me crazy because then the band, the wedding that wants the 6 piece, can only afford the trio.
Ah, yeah, so it's a
It's
little
always
mismatch.
exactly. It's always that way. But we're able to play, and again, like if we're doing the neighborhood bar club gig that we want to play, where it's going to be our friends, and there's not going to be random, there's not going to be a bachelor party in the house.
Yeah,
We'll make less money, but it all kind of everyone knows how to make it work, and you say yes to
right.
this gig, and you turn that gig down to play the cool gig, and yeah,
Yeah,
we're able to get out there.
right. So you were here in St. Louis most of your childhood, I guess?
Yeah, I grew up in Kirkwood and then went to Webster U. I did a semester abroad and then like a summer abroad when I was 20, and then
Okay.
moved to 22. So but from kind of 20 on, I kind of was 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
Yeah. Did you play trombone at an early age?
Yeah, I started in grade school, and then
Okay.
I went to a really small high school in Creve Coeur. Um, that didn't it had a music program, but it was really small. So the concert band I was in was 11 people or 10 people or something. I mean, it was tiny.
That
And we
is
had
time.
really, and we had a pep band that played the basketball games, but like no marching, no jazz bands, no marching, nothing like that. But then my brothers, Tommy and John, had a band. So I would play with them.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
had some guys my age as well. So I
Why in
was,
the world, why did you choose trombone? That's what I ask everybody is
yeah.
how did it come to you that you wanted to play trombone, or did how the band teacher comes to the grade schools and says, yeah, here, try
Yep.
this mouthpiece. Yeah.
Exactly. Oh yeah, no, your body type is this, of course, and it's just they need that people.
Right.
My brother Tommy had bought a trombone for my dad to have fun
Oh,
with. My dad does not play trombone, but he's a big fan of the Preservation Hall band and
yeah.
music. So dating back to before I was born, my dad would put on um, LPs of Preservation Hall and Louis Armstrong, and he must have had a trombone in the 80s as well, 70s or 80s. But he would, you know, not playing, just doing it for fun.
Yeah.
And so when I hit fifth grade or whenever you start band, my brother John was playing drums, my brother Tommy was playing guitar. There was a trombone in the house that Tommy had bought for my dad that wasn't getting played. So it was just a matter of we have a trombone. We're not going to buy another thing.
Right. Right. So that was it.
That was it. And then from day one, it was my dad going, you should learn this solo from Trummy Young. You should learn this solo from Big Jim Robinson. You should learn this Glenn Miller thing. You should learn this Tommy Dorsey thing. And my
Oh,
brother Tommy going, you should learn this Rico Rodriguez solo. Check out who Don Drummond is. You need to hear Don Drummond. Here's a Desmond Decker CD for your 10th birthday. So I was getting those two influences, like New Orleans music, jazz music, and Caribbean music from the beginning.
yeah. Tommy really loves trombone, and
Yeah.
he knows so much about trombone.
Yes. Yeah.
More than I ended up knowing when he asked me to play in his latest ska group.
Right.
Um, it was back in 2021, I think. And he was like, "You got to listen to Ray Drummond." I was like, okay,
Yeah.
but as soon as I heard it, I was like, "Oh my God, like how did I not hear of this guy before?"
And it's so because I'm the opposite. I mean, there's jazz trombone players that I just like slept on until recently. Like, 39.
Yeah.
I went on a Frank Rosalino YouTube hole the other day, and I was like, man,
Oh,
I've never learned any of this stuff. I've barely listened to any of it. It's not on my radar. I'm aware that he's out there and that he's super chopsy. I didn't know what he looked like. I didn't
really?
particularly know what he sounded like. I no. It was
Wow.
it was always like the guy that played in the Scofflaws, the guy that played with the Scatolites, the younger guys that played with the Scatolites, the guy that played with
Right.
the guy that played with Preservation Hall, the guys that played with Louis Armstrong, the guys that played with Sidney Bechet. I mean,
Right.
I knew J.J. Johnson, I knew Curtis Fuller. That's the kind of extent of my
Yeah.
knowledge.
Yeah.
It's not like I know I know their sounds, but it happens
Yeah.
been time.
I've got a great book. It's sitting right over there, which is Conrad Herwig transcribed a whole bunch of Frank solos.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
See
So
that. I went. I remember my first trip to New York. I went and saw the Mingus band, and Conrad was playing, and I was like, "Who the hell is this?" And everybody I was with was like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "That's Conrad Herwig." I'm like, "I
the
don't know,
man.
never heard of him. Like, I don't know who you're talking about. I know who Mingus is, but I've never heard of this guy."
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
so I'm the opposite, right? I'm in the dark, and I've slept on a lot of great trombone players, just because it was for me. It was always New Orleans music, Caribbean music.
Yeah. On that topic, I was just telling one of my students about Tailgate and Kid Ory,
Yeah,
and then how different Miff Mole was from that. Because I think geographically, I think Miff was maybe Upper East Coast or West Coast. I can't remember.
I'm not entirely sure where he is from, but I definitely associate him with the Chicago guys. I don't think he's from Chicago, and he lived in New York because he's in that Great Day in Harlem photo. But
Okay.
he's definitely like in my head, like Red Nichols, Big Spider Beck. He's that,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
complete. So I love how different it is, and so hard
Yes.
to play, so amazingly weird and hard to duplicate.
Yeah, I found online a PDF document with it was a book of his solos, and
Oh wow,
it took me a long time to find.
yeah.
I had to get the YouTube or the Google search. I had to really fine tune it to find that resource. But what a unsung hero,
It's really wild, and I'm again, I'm not totally caught up on the biography, but I know that he was kind of the guy, 20s, early 30s, and then when Tea Garden blew up, he kind of that just kind of went away. It was just like everybody went, "Oh, you can play like that. You can play like Tea Garden." Boom, and then that becomes swing trombone, and then that becomes bebop.
Yeah,
Meanwhile, Bix or not, our Miff Mole had this completely other way of playing that just kind of died,
yeah,
at the end of it. And it's such a unique approach to the instrument. I really, really enjoy listening it and trying to do it, which I cannot.
yeah, yeah. Me too. He really changed my way of thinking about early music, and I gravitated more to that. Although I love the spirit of Kid Ory and the kind of I'm a sort of a sloppy player by nature, and Kid Ory had that not sloppy, but that brash
Yeah.
sound.
And for what it's worth, I'm not particularly hot on Kid Ory's playing until 1948.
Oh my
like
God.
like
Really?
I yeah, I mean he's on those records and those records are amazing, but those Hot Fives or those Jelly Roll records, but he's, in my opinion, his part isn't what makes those records. I like them, but man, his bands from like mid 40s through the late 50s, that's as good.
Okay, so now I'm sleeping. I
Yeah.
don't know if I've listened to that stuff.
Yeah, so he had like a kind of late in life when the whole New Orleans revival thing blew up in the mid 40s. His band, he got a solid rhythm section together and then kind of rotated a few clarinet players and trumpet players through, but they were always
Wow.
he swings so hard and he's in good lip. It's still Kid Ory, it's still rough and it's still it's that
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
tailgate approach. But I think he's a stronger trombone player in 1957 than he is in 1923.
Wow. Okay, that blows my mind. Now I really gotta
Yeah, it's
I
good. I
dig
can
it.
send you some of those records. They're great. I play with a drummer named Hal Smith who lives in Arkansas. It's for those festivals where they kind of piece bands together. But he has a Kid Ory tribute band that's like starts at this club that he had in 1949 and ends at this gig he did with Red Allen in 1961. Very only that, but it's
Wow.
such a swinging band, so swinging, and kid sounds amazing. Really sounds
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. That's really neat. So let's go back to, so you lived in Kirkwood, your brother Tommy, love Tommy. I just saw Tommy Wednesday night. I got
Oh
invited to play with Joe Park.
yeah,
Um and so I went there and Tommy came in, and I hadn't seen Tommy for a while because I left Ska Masala and I wasn't even sure if they were playing much.
yeah, I'm not
And
sure.
so I got to see Tommy. So thank goodness he made you play trombone, probably. um,
Absolutely, completely, yeah.
yeah. So then what happened after that? And you
Right.
know,
So through high school at Westminster, playing a little bit at school, very little, and then was playing in church groups at my church, like just kind of, liturgical music. And then my brothers had a band called The Ambiguous They. I was playing with them. The bass player in that group, a guy named Justin DeCinzo, who I think is in St. Louis now.
yep,
He
he sure
he
is.
his way around trombone. He had played it in high school. And those guys are all Tommy's 8 years older than me. I think Justin might be a little younger, but so he's in college or out of college at this point. If I'm 16, he's probably 24, 23. Um, Justin knew the slide positions and knew how to play the instrument. So Tommy would sing a part to me. I wouldn't know how to do it. Justin would go, this note is in this position, this note is in that position. So I kind of piece it together from there. And we're playing at Cicero's once or twice a month. We're playing at the Way Out Club. We're playing at Frederick's Music Lounge. I don't remember the Galaxy. There was some other club on Washington we would play. But so we're playing often. I also joined, I think my junior year of high school or senior year of high school, I started playing with Secret Cajun Band, which was a ska
Oh
group
yeah.
I loved when I was a kid. And my brother John was playing drums with them. So I
Okay.
came in
Okay.
on trombone because their trombone player is an engineer in Denver, But so I came in with those two guys, those two groups, my Ambiguous They and I'm playing pretty often at that point. At 17, I'm playing at Frederick's Music Lounge, just solidly
Pretty
20
amazing.
often. I'm playing there every other week probably for a couple of years.
Wow.
Yeah, which is wild to be that young. And
Yeah.
then and go to Webster U. I'm at Webster freshman year, sophomore year. Beginning of my junior year, I go to Vienna, Austria, and I
Mm.
studied with a guy named Ed Newmeister. And that's where it kind of really, he lit a fire under my ass and was the first time that anybody had ever just been like, that you're not good enough. You're not doing it well enough. That's not it. Which,
Oh,
and I was like, what do you mean? I'm playing bar gigs in St. Louis. I'm, like I'm working. And he was like, no, that's not, he was hard. He was hard on me, but I was a fan of his. He was one of those modern jazz trombone players that only was on my radar because I was in Vienna. But and he was the one that really he kind of changed up some things about my routine and really kind of lit a fire under my ass. When I got back from studying with him, I went back to Jim Martin, and Jim Martin did such a great job of going, oh, Ed was doing this with you. Let's do that. That's working for you. And he's a phenomenal teacher and performer. But Jim did such a good job of like picking up on what he saw that Ed had done, kind of really inspired. And then another year and a half or so with Jim in St. Louis, but I'm not really learning a lot of jazz. Studying it with Paul Demarinis, getting some language together, but it wasn't particularly clicking. I was looking at in 2006 moving back to Austria to study with Ed, but he last minute came to LA, moved to LA.
oh,
So Jim had an in at Eastman. Jim Martin had an in at Eastman
ah,
College. So I kind of got let in the back door of Eastman. And
wow.
and
Okay.
studied for 2 years at Eastman, did a master's degree at Eastman. And the whole time I'm there, at this point, I'm zeroed in on New Orleans because I'm hanging out with Jeremy Davenport and his band, and I'm going to New Orleans every break I can get, and I know all the Bonorama guys, and I'm talking to them on the phone, and so that's where I started to get more harmony and just facility together. But I'd say I learned more in the first year living in New Orleans than of just like hearing it and doing it every night and hearing harmony work. You just got to do it. You just got to be in the band doing it.
Do you recall at all what some of those harmonic discoveries were when you first, heard something that you didn't understand, or, how did, when that music started coming into you, and
Yeah.
like, did you identify it as, oh wow, this is harmonically different, or were you just taking it in and maybe later it was dawning on you, or
It definitely was. It feels silly to, or I was in over my head, but I definitely was performing music that was just, I wasn't ready to be performing when I was in college because they want to expose you to everything, and which I respect. But I was, playing Bill Evans songs or Herb Ellis song, or like all these songs that were too hard with modal changes or not diatonic functional harmony. So like
right?
and it wasn't until I was out of college and playing traditional music. I've been listening to it, but I started listening to it with a better ear, that it was like, oh, just like 2/5s resolving properly and diatonically and clearly. I didn't get that language together until I was out of college. I mean, that it
Yeah.
really took it for me to be hearing it in person, feeling the vibrations of a clearly played. No one's trying to be too slick. No one's hiding anything. This is a C7 to an F7 to a B flat.
Yeah,
With
there is something about that straightforward nature of
yeah,
traditional music that is doing that. And that's a good point to make, because in college, you are hearing all of this, you're taking in a broad uh,
yeah.
base, and it is a little overwhelming.
I mean, I remember trying to, play Wayne Shorter songs and just being like, I don't get it. I don't understand. I don't know what to play. I have a Jamie Aebersold book here. It doesn't really tell me what to play. I don't know when the teacher just says you have to play the changes. I just didn't know what that meant, until I
Yeah.
learned Spinnies from Heaven when I was 25. I was like, oh, okay, I get it now. So
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to do it, but I do wonder, like, if I went back to grad school now, oh man, now I
Yeah.
know.
Now you could get your PhD.
Yeah, right. No thanks.
um, our clock is going to run out. Do you have a problem like re-upping, like
No, not at all.
continuing?
Okay.
Okay, so when it runs out, I'll just let it run out, and then I
Sounds good.
think we can get right back on the same link.
Cool.
Um, so you know, so you got to LA. That's where Eastman is, in LA, right?
In Rochester, New York.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
I wish.
And Jim Martin had a way for you to get into Eastman.
Exactly. Jim had gone there, and the trombone teacher there, a guy named Mark Kellogg, who's great, was real good friends with Jim. And he had also gone to Eastman, and they were both in the Buddy Rich band together in the 80s. And so there was all these, like, the trombone teacher at Eastman went to Eastman with Jim Martin, the trombone teacher at Webster. So they got me in, and that was, I'm sure. I mean, I auditioned, but I do think that there was some favors being pulled for sure.
Right, right. And that was really nice of Jim. Were you then going down to New York City, or is that's
I
kind
went
of far away? There's far.
to
That's
Hall.
a
It's 4 or 5 hours, but that was the first time I went. Was my first semester in Rochester. We would drive overnight or take the train. Yeah, that was that my first exposure to hanging out at Smalls all night. That's when I saw Conrad Herwig. I went to one of those IAJE conferences, which is now GIN, but those just kind of jazz educators. And just again, same thing, just being like, who are all these unbelievable trombone players? I'd never heard anything like it. Heard my classmates at Eastman were great, but it was But yeah, that was the first time I ever went down to the city. I didn't do any playing there until after I'd moved to New Orleans.
Okay.
But I
So
was
when
going
you
until I got good
when
hang.
how did you then when you were at Eastman and you're learning more about the trombone, how did you know? Well, you've got a good teacher up there, I suppose, and they're kind of helping you learn what you need to learn and help you prioritize.
They did a great job. I mean, we were doing Blazevich studies and like we were doing clef studies and time signature studies and classical etudes. He's mostly a classical guy, Mark Kellogg. He was
Okay.
helping me with changes. I was learning a lot of harmonic stuff again from the saxophone players and the piano teachers. um they did the jazz faculty there did a great job of me going, hey, I want to move to New Orleans. I'm not going to move to New York. I'm going to move to New Orleans. I knew that. And they said, oh, okay, well then you should learn some Bob Brookmeyer, early Bob Brookmeyer stuff where he's doing mute improvisation with Jerry Mulligan, like you
Mm.
should learn Lawrence Brown solos from later Duke Ellington. You should learn
Mm.
Vic Dickinson solos. You should learn Benny Morton stuff from the Count Basie band. Like they didn't meet me in New Orleans 1930 or at the Savoy in 1936. They didn't go that far with me, but they did a great job of going like, okay, collective improvisation. I don't know anything about that, but I know that Jerry Mulligan knew stuff about that, and it's not quite the same, but it's close to what I know. And so let's do that. So like my kind of personal coursework at Eastman was a lot of Duke Ellington, a lot of Count Basie, a lot of Bob Brookmeyer, a lot of Jerry Mulligan, a lot of Chet Baker.
What was the approach in learning those solos? I mean, we have resources today that we didn't have back then,
Right.
right?
We did.
What did you have to do to learn those solos? Because you kind of make it sound real easy. Yeah, I was learning Lawrence Brown but
Sure.
how
Sure.
did you learn the solos?
It was the grueling way of pause, pressing pause on the CD player. I wish it
Okay.
was slowing it down on YouTube. I definitely had some sort of slow down program on my computer that I was using.
Oh, okay.
There was
Okay.
also Eastman has an amazing library, music library.
Really?
And so the big band was playing later Ellington charts, and a lot of times it would have the solos transcribed in it. We did some it was mostly Ellington. The pianist, the big band director there is an Ellington guy. Ellington and Bill Evans are his guys. Um but then the piano teacher there, a guy named Harold Danko, had played with Jerry Mulligan. So he played with Jerry Mulligan and Chet. And so he kind of just had some insight into what they were doing. And we would, in combo, we would play modern, or whatever, jazz, modern jazz, meaning not New Orleans music. And
Right.
he would have the groups collectively improvise on them as if it was a New Orleans band. So
Ah,
right. And then he would stop. I mean, it got pretty tough. Again, I would be good at this now. I was not good at this when I was 22. But he would say, okay, stop you. Hey, Charlie. Okay. That'll be fine.
um,
Good.
man, this is great. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, happy to. Happy to. Well, yeah. So what I was saying, so Harold Danko would have us play, all the things you are, or Moment's Notice, or a Charlie Parker blues, or something like that. But we would have to collectively improvise at the same time, the horn section. And then if we were kind of doing okay, he would stop the band and then go, tenor player, what did the trumpet player just play? Like, you need to play it back or tell me or sing it to me. And if you couldn't say, oh, well, he played here, then he's like, oh, you're not listening. You're playing too much and you're not listening enough.
Yeah.
Which is really hard to do, especially on songs where there's changes like that. But so then when I got to New Orleans and it was, the harmonies dialed back significantly by and large, I had a pretty good idea of how to collectively improvise in a way that would help. help the situation, the musical situation, you know. And that's
Yeah.
I learned that at Eastman. I mean, which is I'm sure they were not, they're not putting that on their brochure, but but that's where I learned it.
Well, that's, it's so important. And I didn't really get my collective thing together until I played with a band here in town
Yeah.
that was doing it, you know.
Yeah, it's its own skill set that you just kind of need the reps, you know, you need to do it.
That's right. I had always wanted to do it in more modern jazz, like hard bop.
Totally. Right.
I thought it would be possible, but I didn't really get the chance until I started Hard Bop Messengers, and I was lucky enough to, bump into a younger player who was still at Webster, and he wanted to play in the group, and
Awesome.
he and I were doing at least, collectively
Right.
stating melodies and
It
doing
works.
collective improvisation together, and it really can happen.
It works in that style. It really, absolutely, especially that like kind of, you know, Blue Note era, 50s to mid 60s. It's perfect. That those changes are perfect. And so many of those grooves are boogaloo or you know, gospel. And so it's really not far removed from
No, no,
especially more modern New Orleans music, you know.
I'm
It,
surprised, that that's the way history went, kind of. I mean,
yeah.
I guess you'd have to be alive back then to know what was really going on, but I know it evolved. I know that it had to be like that and that it was perfect the way it was, but I still wonder why there wasn't a faction at Blue Note that was still doing it or something.
Right. I mean, you know, in the 40s, Blue Note is putting out Sidney Bechet records and Bunk Johnson records. And so I know that's right when they start. But you're right, by mid 50s, it's Horace Silver and the Messengers and Hank Mobley and that traditional vein is kind of gone by that point.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
didn't follow the revival thing like some of the like Impulse even kind of did, and or at least they did some swing records, you know. And Blue Note was hip, it was much hipper.
right, right.
But but that style of playing, absolutely, like you said, it works well on later music, on later harmonies,
It does.
and
Yeah,
it's
it does.
Mick feels, you know. And then a lot of, you know, it's interesting. I when I moved to New Orleans, a lot of new people, non-native people, moved to New Orleans after Katrina. If you talk to musicians from here about what they were playing pre-Katrina, a lot of it is hard bop. Now on the same gig, they're playing a Clifford Brown song or a Lee Morgan song, and then they're playing High Society, and then they're playing, you know, a Duke Ellington song, and then they're playing just kind of a more down the middle swing song, and then they're playing a New Orleans, you know, a brass band song, and then a Louis Armstrong too, you know. So you do. It's been interesting. The more I play with people from here, they don't. There's some exceptions, but I'd say by and large, most of them are pretty tuned in to that era, that 50s era,
Really.
and they play it like that. They'll play, you know, Joy Spring, and you collectively improvise on it, you know, on the way in.
Man, I'd love to hear that. I
And
bet that's
but when you listen to Leroy Jones or Leon Brown or Wendell Brunius or these trumpet players, then that's the way they play. They play like Clifford Brown. They play like Freddie, like Lee Morgan, you know, like
yeah,
that's the language they're coming from. They have the Louis Armstrong language, of course, but you know, music through New Orleans music in New Orleans from 1960, 1970, 1980, there wasn't a ton of down the middle traditionalists. This is what it sounded like in 1935, and this is the way we're going to play it. There were some groups, and some of those groups are still going. Some of those guys are still here, but a lot of those guys were pushing just like they were in New York, you know. But the repertoire was different. Like the New Orleans repertoire was always there, but the harmonic language kept up. Not like it kept up in New York, but it's hipper than you think 1936, you know.
yeah. Well, so bridge the gap for me. Well, there's Eastman, and then there's what we've already talked about in New Orleans.
Right.
Where's the Squirrel Nut Zippers.
Right. So it came pretty soon after I got here. I moved here in the summer of 2008. On my first Mardi Gras in 2009, I was on a float, playing on a float with the brass bands, and I saw Jimbo Mathis watching the parade. I was a fan of the band and recognized him, and I jumped off the float when it, and hey, Jimbo, I play trombone. I'm in this band right now. I got to go. Fan of yours. Nice to meet you. Whatever.
Wow.
Here's my phone number. Cool, cool, cool. He Pokey Lafarge was also in town for Mardi Gras, and I think that might have been when I met him as well, but he knew Jimbo, and so
Ah,
Pokey said to Jimbo, "Hey, I think you met a friend of mine the other day." Okay, cool. That, and then 3 weeks later, I got a phone call from a management team in LA. Well, we need to book a Squirrel and Zippers tour, or we need to
huh.
book a player for a Squirrel and Zippers tour there. And so the guy that they had kind of doing the trombone and playing a little bit of piano and some background vocals had just left the group. And
Ah,
they needed a horn player, and Jimbo met me on a parade. I mean, it was that simple. It was right place, right time, completely random. There was a few connections, a few mutual friend connections, and then it was a audition tour up the Midwest, and then that was it. I was in the group. that
so
and what
if you
what
hadn't
was
have jumped off that float, oh, sorry about that.
no, I mean, unreal. And Mardi Gras parades, there's a billion people out there that I zeroed in on Jimbo is insane.
Yeah.
Totally. I that first tour I did with them, their horn section was not on it, their usual horn section. So they brought back the tenor player from one of their albums who had not been touring with the group, and then the trumpet player from the Hot album, which is the one with Hell that went platinum on it, who lives in New Orleans and is a very strict, this is how they played it in 1936. And so this is how I'm going to play. And he's a phenomenal, probably one of the two best traditional jazz trumpet players in the world. And he lives here, and I play with him a lot now, but as like a 24-year-old on tour with the Squirrel and the Zippers, where he had this success of a platinum record, but it wasn't the music that he particularly wanted to be playing. It was a head trip to be like, I'm on the gig with Duke, with the Squirrel and the Zippers, playing these awesome gigs. But he kind of doesn't care. He seems like he might be a little pissed, but I'm thrilled. And so it was a good introduction to some of the more traditional New Orleans styles, from Duke, because I hadn't met him, and there was a few other, and then he kind of brought me into Preservation Hall, and so really that Squirrel and Zippers gig and that specific tour that I got hired for introduced me to a ton of people here in New Orleans.
I'll bet. And Preservation Hall, I mean, that's like hallowed grounds, and you've played there.
Yeah, I used to play there. It's been a while now. I don't play there often, but I used to play there every week. For a few years, I had a weekly gig there.
Oh my
It's
God.
crazy. I know. The guy that I played there with was a clarinetist named Orange Kellen, who just retired 4 or 5 years ago. Had some hearing issues, but he moved to New Orleans from Sweden in 1964, 65 as an 18-year-old to play at Preservation Hall. So he's kind of one of the OG Preservation Hall musicians. Like now he was a kid. He wasn't, brought out of retirement guy like a lot of the roster was, but he put out albums with Jabbo Smith, and he put out albums with Earl Hines, and he put out all these albums with all these unbelievable New Orleans records that I had at my house growing up. When he was a kid, he was on these albums, so I had been listening to him since I was 10, whether I knew it or not. And then I'm 24, I'm playing with him once a week at Preservation Hall. It's nuts. But I mean, I met Jimbo Mathis. Jimbo Mathis needed a trumpet player. Duke Hiker was on the record 10 years prior. It's wild.
That is. Yeah.
Wild. Yeah.
And uh how long were you with the Zippers?
So that first, I did like a solid year touring with them in 2009. Then Catherine left the group. That first year, it was the original band, except for me and the saxophone player. Otherwise, it was the original drummer, the bass player that came in on the second album, the Jimbo, Catherine Whalen, the lead singers. Um, Catherine got sick of touring. She had a young kid. And
Mm.
so she didn't want to do the touring anymore. So we didn't do anything in 2010. Then like 2011, 12, 13, we would do 1 or 2 gigs randomly a year, but
Mm.
no, not really get in the bus. It'd be fly to wherever, play 1 gig, fly home the next day.
Mm.
No, nothing big. And then Jimbo was coming to New Orleans a lot. So I'm playing with Jimbo in New Orleans, but not Squirrel and Zippers per se. They got back together in 2016, maybe. And then that's when it was Jimbo and all new people. It was Jimbo and all New Orleans people. So I kind of helped him get that group together because he's coming to New Orleans, and who's good on the road, who can play piano, who can play, I didn't do all of it. There was a violin player did a lot of that as well. But kind of introduced him to some of the younger guys in New Orleans. Did that gig again for another 6 months or so, 6 months or 8 months, and then left the group because they travel more than I want to travel, frankly.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so I'm still friendly with them. I'm still on some of the albums.
Uh-huh.
Jimbo has done work on my records, like we're buddies, but I haven't been doing the traveling gig with him since 2016.
Okay. What inspired you to go sort of towards the Caribbean thing?
Yeah, I was I was playing with a group here. I still play with sometimes called Panorama, who
Mm.
does it's led by a clarinet player. So they play all music that is clarinet driven. He's got broad tastes. So it's a little bit of New Orleans music. It's a lot of Eastern European and klezmer music. Then he plays a lot of Beguine music, which is from the French Caribbean. And it's that music specifically is clarinet and trombone almost exclusively. I mean,
Whoa.
there's a rhythm section, but no trumpet is what I mean. The clarinet is the lead. The trombone kind of acts as the clarinet.
Mm-hmm.
It developed in an interesting way that mirrors New Orleans music. Like in the teens, you can find they had a lot of it was recorded in Paris, but you can get really early recordings of these Beguine ensembles. And there in the 19 teens, it kind of sounds like foxtrot music. There's violins, there's banjos. It might be more of like an orchestral thing. There will be a little bit of a hot section where you can tell they're improvising, but it's not like full on abandoned jazz music. At least it doesn't sound like that now. It might have been, but then in the 1920s, things get a little bit hipper. It kind of in the 30s, it starts swinging more.
Mm.
Um, it kind of disappears in the 40s because of the war. In the 1950s, it comes back, and the banjo is gone, the violin is gone, the hi-fi is better. They're swinging deeper. I mean, they're not swinging like America swinging. It's still clearly Caribbean music, but it's just like the pocket is a little hipper, I'd say. In the 60s, the clarinet's gone and it's saxophone. Electric guitar comes in, maybe electric bass. Later in the 60s, there's no trombone anymore. It's saxophone driven, keyboard driven. In the 70s, it kind of turns into soca music.
Oh.
In the 80s, it kind of turns into soca disco, like that reggaeton, like it kind of, but this is all from the French Caribbean, from Martinique, Guadeloupe, most of it. So it was just music. So this band Panorama is playing these songs, but the instrumentation of Panorama is a little funny. It's tuba and accordion, and then there's all this Eastern European music, and they do jazz music and stuff like that. So I just kind of wanted to play that. That was my favorite book. My favorite chapter of the Panorama book was the Caribbean book. To learn that music, I had a Spotify playlist and YouTube playlist, and was going to the library to just try and get hip to who these guys were. And then that kind of turned me on. Those algorithms led me to music from Trinidad more. And then I found a lot of dance bands. This is mostly what my group tries to emulate. I found all of these dance bands from Trinidad who are playing music from the French Caribbean, but they're also some of them are playing New Orleans songs because those were popular songs on the radio, and Fats Domino songs were popular on the radio in the Caribbean in the 1950s and 60s. So it's this Caribbean sounding, not particularly Latin take on American pop music, or at least it tracks with American pop music. Instrumental though, not vocal driven. Instrumental dance music from the Caribbean. That's not Latin. Small niche.
Yeah,
but
right.
but I found that and fell in love with it. And so there's 4 or 5 band leaders from Trinidad, from Antigua that are right down the middle, hotel dance bands, 1960, that just checks every one of my boxes.
Wow, that
Yeah.
is so cool. I really didn't know much about that lineage at all. And now I want to listen to that stuff.
Yeah,
If
and
I
and
just
the
look,
soca stuff specifically comes more from Trinidad, but it's wild to see the French Caribbean music and the Haitian music, how it develops from the 20s to today, really mirrors how American music developed. Duh, I mean, why wouldn't it? But it's awesome to hear it, and Latin music too. Where things get less acoustic, they get louder, they get groovier. What to our modern ears.
yeah.
Yeah.
So if I listen to your, did you say 3 albums you've done?
Let's see, we did a record straight to acetate in 2016 or 17 maybe, and that was just as a lark. It wasn't even a band, but it was songs I wanted to do, and a friend of mine had an acetate cutter, so we did that.
What was
Then
that like? What was that technology like to work with?
yeah, it was finicky at best.
Really? Yeah.
We threw a lot of shellac away that day, but it's cool. You play into a horn, and it cuts into an acetate record, and someone's there with a paintbrush brushing the
The
negative away.
shavings?
Yeah.
Like the
Yep.
wow.
And then you have to make sure nothing is on a joist in the floor, because that pops the needle. And I mean, it's a pretty rough sounding record. It sounds like those records from the 1920s or 30s. I mean, it sounds like that.
Is there a digitized version of that we can hear
Yes.
online?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's online, called Say Begin is the name of that album. Then I'm after that, I was like, I should start a band. This is fun. So like that was just done for fun. And then after that, I was I think I could do this. So I kind of, was hearing more modern music. So just like that, I got electric guitar, I got tenor saxophone. We skewed that direction. Put out a Christmas album in 2019 that again was kind of done like let's just put a Christmas record out. That got a vinyl release today, actually. And then
Oh
in
wow.
2020, we put out a full length CD. That's the green one. And then that came out on vinyl a year ago. Then in 2022, I did an album that also mixed in some New Orleans rock and roll and traditional jazz.
Ah.
I did that on a jazz label, and so I've had some distribution issues with that. So it's kind of hard to find that one.
Oh, that's a bummer.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Is there is there anything you want to talk about?
There were, it was a you own the music, we own the distribution, and then they printed the wrong amount of CDs, and then
Okay.
they were trying to encourage selling the music, which I'm not. I hope people buy it, but at this point, who are we fooling?
That's not what we're not making any money off of that.
Exactly right. And so it wasn't distributed, essentially. Like you
Ah,
had to buy it to hear it. I've been able to get it back, and I put it on Bandcamp, and I'm probably in the next few months I'll probably just put it up on everything so it's out there. But I don't have any physical copies of it. Like they didn't print enough, and we sold them, and so that was it. And then we've got a
yeah.
new one coming out in a couple of months, in probably
Oh,
March. We'll have a new one. It'll be a little bit of mix of the Caribbean stuff and some rock and roll. But
when you say New Orleans rock and roll,
yeah,
um, so do you know Mark Mason? You
yeah,
know
of
Sonny
course.
Boy? Well, of course, you know
Yeah.
Sonny Boy. Um, when I get to play with the Sins of the Pioneers, they
Awesome.
play this amazing mix of music. And aren't they playing some old New Orleans rock and roll?
Definitely. That kind of 12/8 ding, 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 piano and tenor saxophone driven, mostly 1950s, early mid 1960s. New Orleans rock and roll is so great.
Okay.
I love it so much. And I knew I was in my ear a little bit from Clue 103, like Yeah, I heard Fats Domino and I heard Smiley Lewis on the radio a little bit, but a year or two after living here, there's a scene for that. Not for performing it particularly, but for listening to it in DJs, dance parties. So wow, I fell into that stuff and fell hard. So and you can buy those 45s here for nothing because everybody had them.
Okay.
So I have collected a ton of those 45s, and then I've been able to play it a little bit. But that's great music, and that's totally it. Totally what Sonny Boy's playing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I just didn't really know much about that at all. And I don't think I could name but a few. I mean, Fats Domino.
Of course.
Who
Yeah.
who are who are some other like popular names that we might recognize?
The guy that was kind of Fats's musical director is a guy named Dave Bartholomew, who wrote a lot of those songs. He was kind of the Johnny Johnson to Chuck Berry. It was kind of that relationship. So Dave Bartholomew was a trumpet player, and he wrote a lot of Fats's tunes and led the band. He also did a lot of sides on his own that are great. Smiley Lewis is a big one. I don't know why I love you, but I do. Smiley Lewis. Clarence Frogman Henry is great and still alive. I can sing like a girl. It goes up all high. I can sing like a frog. He's got some you would know. Lloyd Price. Oh, she's got personality. Stagger Lee. Thomas, of course, who is still alive. Alan Toussaint wrote a lot of those songs. The early Neville brothers, Art Neville specifically, did a lot of kind of ding, 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 1950s rock and roll. Chuck, Little Richard recorded a lot in New Orleans. Ray Charles did some work in New Orleans. So, I mean, there was a huge scene for that music here up until 1963, 1964. Then it kind of all went to LA.
So no studios there anymore. Nobody's
in the 60s, the Meters got really big down here, and Alan Toussaint stayed here. Maybe he had an LA period, but the music modernized. So that kind of 12/8 swamp pop feel, you don't get as much from the mid 60s on. It gets funkier, and it stayed through the 80s, just like we were talking about. It turns into synths, and it turns into the Meters foot eventually kind of turned into a disco group, and the Neville brothers through the 80s. But I mean, I couldn't speak to this firsthand, but it seems like from records and in the 90s or so, a lot of those groups started kind of coming out. Huey Piano Smith and the Clowns and those groups, maybe Jazz Fest brings them out. You start hearing that rhythmic feel and those melodies again.
Yeah, like the 90s.
Yeah,
the 90s started giving birth to retro almost.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's it. Totally. And then, and a lot of those guys were still alive, and some of them still are. And so they play Jazz Fest every year, and it's awesome to hear it. And people here recognize it as their own. Like, that is music that they know. Whether you're a music fan or not, those Smiley Lewis songs if you live here.
Do you ever get hired to play with someone at Jazz Fest?
Oh yeah. I'm usually do Jazz Fest 10 or 11 sets a year is kind of where I've fallen in with. I do a lot of in the traditional jazz tent. And then the past handful of years, I've been getting the calls for kind of like, you can read. And so, there might be a band from out of town, or a band that doesn't normally have horns is going to use horns because the budget's expanded for the festival. So I've been playing with John Cleary, the pianist. I play with him and always at the festival. This year I played with Al Carnival Time Johnson, who's an old R&B guy, and John Boutte, who's a modern singer. And I did Jazz Fest with the OJs a couple years ago. And
no way.
Yeah, it's fun. Wow. The coolest one I ever did was with Alan Toussaint. Probably 10 years ago or so, 9 years ago.
Why was that the coolest? What was?
That's because he wrote so many New Orleans songs. He was a character. If he lived here, he was just kind of he'd drive around town in a Rolls Royce, a vintage Rolls Royce, and he wrote so many songs that everyone in New Orleans know. And he would wear these like colorful, amazing, colorful suits, and he was nice to everybody. And he would just show up at kind of dumpy bars and hang out and
Wow.
get. And if they had a piano, he'd sit there and play the piano. Like he was around and he was on the scene. He was in the community. Died kind of. It was a surprise when he died, but everyone knew him, and he would hang. Like Alan Toussaint was making the hang with how many platinum
Wow.
records and Grammys. It was insane. And
That's
he was
amazing.
around, and and he was, his personality was really soft and kind, and it was just he was a really special person. So when he showed up, you pay your respects, of course, and then he would take it. He wouldn't tell you to stop, but then he would tell you what he enjoyed, and he would, and then he'd have some red wine, and he'd listen to you play, and he'd be complimentary, and like he was just a sweet human being, pretty special guy. So playing with him, I mean, was in the rehearsal, and I don't remember what song we were playing, but it sounded like Groove Me, boom, 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 that song. And I leaned over to the trumpet player and I said, "Oh man, this sounds like Groove Me." And he went, "Everybody here is on that track except for you." He was like, "Yeah, there's a reason it sounds like Groove Me. I'm the one that played it. And so is he, and so is he, and so is he, and so is he, and so is he." They're just these guys, these session guys in New Orleans that in the 1950s and 60s were banging out hit after hit after hit. And now they're still around, So that's probably the coolest gig I've done for me.
Yeah, yeah. What about, is Trombone Shorty a guy that like you could see,
He
or do
doesn't
you know him?
I
Like,
do know him. He doesn't play here particularly often. A few times a year, he's got a foundation that does a lot of great
hmm,
educational work and just kind of outreach work in the city. He's around. He has a studio. I've got friends in his group. We're friendly. I don't see him a ton. And like in the band doesn't play here, more than a few times a year. They tour a lot, and he doesn't really do anything with other. You're not going to see him as a sideman in somebody else's group unless it's U2 or or somebody famous.
yeah,
He's not playing the bar gig. But he's around and
right.
is one of the nicest people in town. He's a great guy.
Yeah, yeah. I think he's done something that's pretty special.
Agreed.
And
Yeah.
I really appreciate what he does, and his, foundation. I'd heard him talking about his foundation, um, and that's amazing.
A friend of mine is the Barry player in that band, Dan Osterreicher, Diesel Dan, and we always, because Shorty and I have done some records together. We've played together, and we've both been on sessions together, and he's been very complimentary of mine. So whenever I see Dan, "Oh man, we were just talking about you with Troy," and whatever. But and I say in bafflement, like, it's just not fair that anybody can be as good as him. Like, how, but he makes the point where it's like he's from the most musical city in the country, in the most musical neighborhood in the city, Treme,
Hmm.
from the most musical family in the neighborhood, the Andrews family, who was basically born with a trombone in his hand. I mean, it would make less sense if he wasn't good. Not to take away from any of his work, but it's unfair for us mortals to compare ourselves to Shorty. Like, he was just born to be the monster that he is. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, yeah. That's really cool though, that you could, you could say that, and I hadn't really thought of that before. Um, but he was born to play it, and
Yeah.
um, do you feel like you um are kind of living up to do you even have an expectation for yourself? How
Yeah.
do you rate yourself? I mean, I'm
Definitely.
just curious what,
I hold myself to a pretty annoying standard, I think, and when I'm not meeting it, I am not fun to be around. And I, but I, for me, it's not fun to play unless I'm playing close to my best. So I am pretty strict about maintenance and routine
So
and just
you practice?
yeah. Like I don't do anything without having a good 40 to 60 minute warm up. Nothing. Nothing.
Wow.
Like something like this, I warmed up. If I'm going to teach a lesson, which doesn't happen often, I warm up for an hour before it. Rehearsal, definitely warm up. Gig, of course, I warmed up for an hour before that. So,
Wow.
and it's probably not something that the listener can tell, but it's just like if things aren't firing the way I expect them to, then I get frustrated with myself, and I I get in my head, which is
Okay. So
fun.
even someone accomplished like you get into your head.
Definitely. And then, like my as you can probably tell, my influences are a little scattered. So I'm often trying to meet what the band leader is expecting. And so if I'm playing with a group that's in a traditional jazz setting and I know that this band leader likes the way music sounded in 1938, then I'm trying to sound like JC Higginbotham, and I'm trying to sound like Lawrence Brown, and I'm trying to sound like Miff Mole or Tea Garden. But then I know, oh, I know this band leader played with Dave Bartholomew in the 70s, and he knows his repertoire, but he's not as picky about the harmony. Okay, well, now I'm trying to, okay, my eighth notes are a little bit looser, and my range might expand a little bit, and
Mm.
I'm going to play some flat nines, whereas the other gig I would never. It's natural nines all the way, and so that changes. And then now, so I get in my head about that. This person likes brass band music. Okay, now I'm trying to sound like Shorty. This person
Yeah.
likes Kid Ory from 1949 to 1961. Okay, I can only play like Kid Ory. So I'm in my head a lot, probably too much.
What's your warm up then consist of if it's 40 to 60 minutes?
Yeah,
What
I do a lot of false tones. This is
tell
stuff
me what yeah.
E is the lowest note. So I spend a lot of time from E flat down, lipping it down. I used to have a trigger horn, so I kind of got those positions figured, but just triads down all the way down to working way, way down to double pedals. And so, that's taken me 15 minutes of that, 20 minutes of that probably. And then after that, then I work on flexibility, trying to go high. I do it with a metronome usually. So like this is mostly Ed Neumeister stuff. But if I have a metronome at around 100, I'll do as high as I can go comfortably in 7 positions, then eighth notes. 7 positions, then triplets. In 7 positions, then 16th notes. In 7 positions, so
Yeah.
and then I play a lot of melodies and I work on just making sure I got, working the fuzz out around the edges. But it's
Is there
mostly flexibility and low notes.
is there something that you're working on now in particular that is really, really challenging? You're not quite getting it?
I have always been I've always had weak articulation because it's what I work on the least, and especially in the high register. So I've been trying to be more conscious about like shedding articulation and from F up, F
Do you
above the
do
scratch.
do you do doodle tonguing at all?
I don't think about it. I think I probably do, but
Hmm.
it's not intentional. I work with the breaks in the horn mostly. I have a very vertical sense of harmony. I don't think scales ever. I just kind of
Hmm.
that never made sense to me. So when I see a G7, like I just immediately think G, B, D, F, A. Those are the 5 notes. And so to play that on the horn, it's this way and you don't need to use your tongue much. So
Right.
So my solos are usually working that way. And so I'm utilizing the breaks in the horn more than articulation.
Okay. Wow. That's really cool. Oh, I'm getting a signal. 2 minutes left.
Yeah.
It's a 2-minute warning. So you don't teach much, you said?
No, there's a traditional jazz camp in June I do, and then random lessons, but that's about 4 or 5 a year, probably. Hardly ever.
What kind of student comes to that camp?
Mostly like retired folks who stopped playing when they had kids, and now they want to get back into it.
Oh, really? So a lot of adults kind of wanting to relearn and
Yeah.
Okay. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just start to wrap it up because I don't want to run out and then start up again.
Sure.
I really what horn what kind of horn is that? I gotta ask that.
The King 3B that I picked up from DJ down in wherever DJ is, I forget, but yeah.
Yeah, he lives in the town that Popeye was from, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I got it a couple years ago and love it. And I play a Greg Black 6.5.
Okay.
So
standard stuff, right?
down the middle. Yeah, nothing special.
Right on. Well, you sound great. I love your playing.
Thank you so much, man. This is
I
really
really look up to you and loved catching you in person. And I've heard just the one latest album. I'm going to go back now and listen to some more, but and we'll post everything, all the links that you can provide, so that people can hear your music. And it's just really been great to be able to learn your story.
Thank you for the time. Really, it's awesome to catch up for sure.
Yeah, it's great to see you, and thanks again. So I'll tell the viewing public again. Our guest has been Charlie Halloran.